A healthy human scalp contains about 100,000 individual follicles, and for nearly half the people on Earth, those follicles have a pre-programmed expiration date. Let that sit for a moment. It is a flat, biological reality that is as certain as the sunrise, yet we treat it like a personal tragedy or a modern glitch in the system. To understand where this began, you have to imagine a world without mirrors, without hats, and without the concept of vanity. Picture the high, shimmering heat of the East African Rift Valley 2 million years ago. The air is thick with the scent of dry grass and the metallic tang of sun-baked basalt. You are moving across this landscape, and for the first time in the history of your lineage, you feel the sun not as a warmth filtered through thick fur, but as a direct, stinging weight on the crown of your head. This was the birth of the naked ape, the moment we traded the protection of a full-body coat for the ability to sweat and run down prey in the midday sun. But as our bodies became smooth, our heads kept their covering, creating a strange evolutionary sanctuary that we have been slowly losing ever since. We often think of this loss as a recent phenomenon, a byproduct of processed food or modern stress, but the truth is buried much deeper in our code, waiting in a series of genetic switches that were flipped before we even had a word for the stars. But if we lost our fur to survive the heat, it would be logical to assume that evolution would guard the hair on our heads with everything it had to protect our massive, heat-sensitive brains. Yet, the biological reality of male pattern baldness, what scientists call androgenetic alopecia, is a direct contradiction to that survival instinct. It isn't a disease, and it isn't a random failure. It is a meticulously executed process driven by a hormone called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. To see this happening, you have to look past the skin and into the microscopic world of the hair follicle. Imagine a follicle as a tiny, industrious factory. In a full head of hair, these factories run on a cycle of several years, producing thick, pigmented strands. But when DHT enters the scene, it binds to receptors in the follicle and begins to send a new set of instructions. Slowly, over years of repeated growth cycles, the follicle begins to shrink. It's a process called miniaturization. The factory doesn't close down, it just gets smaller and smaller. The hair it produces becomes thinner, shorter, and loses its color, eventually turning into vellus hair, the fine, peach fuzz you see on a newborn. This isn't a sudden death, it's a slow, quiet fading. And while we might blame our fathers or our stressful jobs, a massive 2018 study published in Nature Communications, which analyzed the genomes of over 200,000 men, found that there isn't just one baldness gene. There are more than 600 distinct genomic locations that determine if and when your hair will start this retreat. It is a polygenic orchestra, a complex harmony of hundreds of tiny genetic variations that were already circulating in the human population long before we ever built a city. This genetic blueprint seems like a death sentence for the hairline, yet the historical record suggests we didn't even notice it for most of our existence because we were too busy surviving. There is a common myth that ancient humans didn't go bald because they lived natural lives, but the reality is much bleaker. For most of the Paleolithic era, the average life expectancy was skewed heavily by a staggering infant mortality rate. While those who made it to adulthood could live into their 50s or 60s, the vast majority of men were dead from infection, injury, or predation before the DHT-driven miniaturization process could even reach its first visible stage. In a world where a broken leg or a dental abscess was a death sentence at 25, a receding hairline was a luxury the environment rarely allowed anyone to achieve. We didn't start going bald in the modern era, we simply started living long enough to see the process finish. The machinery for baldness was already there, idling in the background of our DNA, waiting for the safety of civilization to provide the decades of life necessary for the follicles to finally wither. If the Greeks and Romans were the first to panic about their scalps, then the paintings on the walls of the Nile suggest we've been lying to ourselves about when this anxiety actually started. We have tangible, visual proof from ancient Egypt that baldness was not just present, but common enough to be a standard part of their artistic vocabulary. In 2019, Egyptology professor Samar Kamal performed a forensic audit of private Egyptian tombs and documented 122 individual bald men painted into scenes of daily life. These weren't caricatures. These were men shown farming, scribing, and fishing, depicted with the classic horseshoe pattern of hair loss, smooth on top with a fringe around the sides. These paintings date as far back as 2613 BC. That means 4,500 years ago, an Egyptian man stood in the sun, felt the heat on his bare scalp, and likely felt the exact same pang of recognition we feel today when we catch our reflection in a window. The Egyptians were so familiar with this process that they developed specific terminology for the different stages of hair loss and even incorporated a baldness line into their mummification rituals to ensure the wig or head covering sat correctly on the deceased. They treated it as a fact of life, yet their medical papyri are littered with desperate, magical remedies involving the fat of lions, hippopotamuses, and crocodiles. We see a culture that was perfectly comfortable with the sight of a bald head in public, while privately, they were terrified of it, creating a tension that has remained unchanged for 40 centuries. Despite the obvious logic that humans are uniquely cursed with this condition, we are actually part of a much stranger primate tradition. If you look at our closest relatives, the chimpanzees, you will occasionally find individuals who are almost entirely hairless. But when you look closer, the pattern is wrong. Chimpanzees lose hair in patches, often across their entire bodies, and it isn't driven by the same androgenetic receptors that target the human crown and temples. It is what biologists call parallel evolution, two different species arriving at a similar-looking result through entirely different genetic pathways. Then there are the macaques. Certain species of macaque experience hair loss that looks remarkably like the human version, but it affects both males and females equally, suggesting it's a response to social stress or environmental factors rather than a strictly hormonal roadmap. Humans are the only primates that have evolved this specific, gendered, age-related retreat of the hairline. Our version of baldness is a unique biological signature. It is a byproduct of how we handle testosterone and how our skin evolved to be the primary interface between our massive brains and the outside world. We didn't inherit baldness from an ancestor we share with chimps. We invented a whole new way to lose our hair as we became human. This seems like a genetic glitch, a failure of the system that should have been weeded out by natural selection long ago, yet evolution has guarded these genes with surprising ferocity. Why would a trait that causes so much distress and offers no obvious survival benefit persist for tens of thousands of years? The answer lies in a concept called pleiotropy. This is the idea that a single gene can influence multiple, seemingly unrelated traits. The same genetic clusters that regulate your hair follicle sensitivity to DHT are also deeply involved in other, more critical systems. Researchers have found that the variants associated with male pattern baldness are often linked to increased bone mineral density and specific metabolic functions in the pancreas. In the harsh environment of the Pleistocene, having stronger bones or a more efficient metabolism was a massive survival advantage. If that advantage came bundled with a receding hairline 30 years down the line, evolution made the trade without hesitation. To the cold logic of natural selection, a few decades of thicker bones in your youth is worth the price of a bald head in your 40s. By the time the hair starts to thin, you've likely already passed your genes to the next generation, making the baldness invisible to the filters of evolution. But even if the genes were just hitching a ride on other benefits, there is a compelling theory that baldness itself served a purpose in the social theater of early humans. In many social species, physical markers that appear with age serve as signals of status and maturity. Some evolutionary psychologists suggest that the bald head became a honesty signal of social rank. In a small tribe, a man with a bald head was a man who had survived. He was an elder, a carrier of tribal memory, and someone who had proven his fitness by simply not dying in a world that tried to kill everything. The smooth scalp might have served as a visual cue that reduced aggression from younger, more hot-headed males, signaling that this individual was a non-competitor for mates but a high-status source of wisdom. This is why the horseshoe pattern is so consistent across all human populations. It isn't random, it is a signal. It tells the rest of the group exactly where you are in the arc of your life. We spend billions of dollars trying to erase that signal today, but for most of our history, that bare scalp was a badge of veteran status in the most dangerous game on Earth. On the surface, this looks like a modern struggle against the mirror, But when you look into the chemistry of the follicle, you realize you are looking at a process that was finalized before the first pyramid was ever planned. The 2018 Nature Communications study didn't just find the genes, it found their age. Many of the markers that determine your hair loss are ancient, predating the split between different human populations. However, there is a specific set of mutations that changed everything. By analyzing the genetic distribution of baldness today, researchers can see a clear divide. While hair thinning exists in all human groups, the specific aggressive form of male pattern baldness we recognize as the standard version is significantly more prevalent in populations with European and Middle Eastern ancestry. This points toward a specific evolutionary event, a mutation that gained a foothold in a small population of humans as they migrated out of Africa roughly 40,000 years ago. As these groups moved into colder climates and their diets and lifestyles changed, this specific genetic package became embedded in their lineage. It wasn't a mistake, it was a passenger on one of the most important journeys in human history. You can still see the remnants of this journey in the way we try to fight it. Every year, men spend an estimated $4 billion on hair restoration, lotions, and surgeries. We use minoxidil to widen the blood vessels around the follicle, and we use finasteride to block the conversion of testosterone into DHT, essentially trying to rewrite a chemical contract that our ancestors signed 40,000 years ago. We are the only creatures on the planet that are aware of our own biological obsolescence, and the hair follicle is the front line of that awareness. It is a tiny, recurring reminder that our bodies are not static, they are processes in motion. The ancient Greeks understood this better than we do. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, was so famously bald that a specific type of advanced hair loss is still named after him. He tried every concoction imaginable from horseradish to pigeon droppings, and in his failure, he made a brilliant observation. He noticed that eunuchs never went bald. He couldn't have known about DHT or 5-alpha reductase, but he saw the link between masculinity and the loss of hair. He realized that the very thing that makes a man, in the biological sense, is the very thing that eventually takes his hair away. It is an inseparable package deal, a hormonal tax on our biology that has been collected for millennia. If we look back at the 122 bald men in the Egyptian tombs, we see a mirror of our own contradictions. We see a high-ranking official painted with a smooth scalp, standing with dignity, while at the same time, we know that in the quiet of his home, he was likely rubbing the fat of a greyhound onto his head in a desperate attempt to bring back the hair of his youth. This is the human condition, the ability to accept a reality in public while fighting it with everything we have in private. We are a species defined by our refusal to accept the limits of our biology, whether that means building planes to fly or using chemistry to save a follicle. But the follicle is a stubborn opponent. It follows a clock that was wound up long before we had calendars. It is governed by a set of receptors that don't care about our vanity or our social standing. They only care about the level of DHT in the blood and the instructions written in the DNA 40,000 years ago. The struggle Julius Caesar faced wasn't just about his hair, it was about the loss of the image of the youthful conqueror. His invention of the comb-over, growing the hair long in the back and pulling it forward to hide the thinning crown, was a tactical maneuver as calculated as any battle he fought in Gaul. He even wore the laurel wreath not just as a symbol of victory, but as a functional piece of camouflage. It is a reminder that even the most powerful men in history have been brought to their knees by a tiny hormone byproduct. The Roman Senate could be controlled, the Rubicon could be crossed, but the miniaturization of a hair follicle remained an unconquerable territory. This persistent failure to cure baldness across 4,000 years of documented history is one of the few things that truly unites us with the ancients. We share their genes, we share their hormones, and we share their exact same brand of insecurity. When you look at a bust of a Roman senator or an Egyptian statue, you aren't just looking at history, you are looking at a biological lineage that is still playing out in the mirrors of every bathroom in the world this morning. It is easy to feel that we are living in a unique time of biological decay, but the truth is far more grounding. We are the recipients of an evolutionary trade-off that was made in the dark, ancient past. We traded the protection of fur for the power of the sweat gland, And we traded the permanence of our hair for the strength of our bones and the maturity of our social signals. The receding hairline is not a sign that something is going wrong. It is a sign that everything is working exactly as it was designed to. It is the visual evidence of a hormonal system that is functioning at full capacity, doing exactly what it has done since the first modern humans stepped into the light of the European plains. We are not losing our hair because we are weak or because we are modern. We are losing it because we are the survivors of a lineage that prioritized other things. We are the descendants of the men who lived long enough to go bald, the ones who survived the predators, the infections, and the starvations of the deep past. The next time you catch a glimpse of a thinning crown or a retreating temple in the mirror, try to feel the weight of that history. You are not looking at a flaw. You are looking at a 40,000-year-old mutation that has survived ice ages, the rise and fall of empires, and the transition from the savanna to the skyscraper. You are walking in the footsteps of the men who painted the tombs of Saqqara and the philosophers who walked the streets of Athens. You are part of a massive, silent brotherhood that spans every continent and every century of human existence. The itch of the sun on a bare scalp is the same itch felt by the first hominids who stood upright, and the private worry about a receding line is the same worry that drove an Egyptian scribe to reach for a jar of crocodile fat. It is a shared human experience, a biological thread that binds us to the very beginning of our story. We often imagine that we can outrun our biology, that the next supplement or the next laser treatment will finally be the one to break the code. But the code is deep and it is old. It is written into the very foundation of what it means to be a human male. And perhaps there is a strange kind of beauty in that. In a world that is changing faster than we can keep up with, our follicles remain a constant. They follow the same rules they followed in the time of the pharaohs. They respond to the same hormones that fueled the Roman legions. They are a living link to our deepest past, a biological clock that reminds us where we came from and how we got here. We aren't just going bald. We are participating in a masterpiece of evolutionary compromise that has been in production for millions of years. The heat of the sun on your head is the same sun that baked the Rift Valley, and the skin on your scalp is the same skin that allowed your ancestors to outrun the fastest predators on Earth. We lost our fur to become the masters of the planet, and we lose our hair as the price of that mastery. It is a small price to pay for the journey we've taken. The story of baldness isn't a story of loss. It's a story of what we became. It's a story of survival, of social signals, and of a genetic journey that began in the heart of Africa and ended in the mirror in front of you. It is a story that is far from over, but its beginning is more ancient than we ever dared to imagine. Everything you've been told about baldness being a modern problem is dismantled by a single, undeniable reality found in our deepest genetic history. While we blame stress or hats or the environment, the specific genetic mutation responsible for the most common form of hair loss on Earth didn't happen yesterday, or even in the Middle Ages. It was forged in the freezing migrations of the Upper Paleolithic. By tracing the AR gene variants back through human history, researchers have pinpointed the origin of the modern balding pattern to a specific group of humans moving into the Middle East and Europe exactly 40,000 years ago. This means your receding hairline isn't a modern glitch. It is a prehistoric legacy that has survived for 1,600 generations. You aren't losing your hair, you are just finally displaying a biological signal that was written into your ancestors' DNA before the first dog was ever domesticated. It's not a failure of your body. It's the final, inevitable expression of a 40,000-year-old promise. So, the next time you look in the mirror, stop looking for a cure and start looking at a survivor. You're not just a man with a thinning crown. You are a living museum of human evolution, carrying a signal that was already ancient when the first stone was laid for the Great Pyramid. If you found this dive into our ancient blueprints fascinating, consider subscribing for more deep-time investigations into why we are the way we are. And tell me in the comments, does knowing your baldness is 40,000 years old make it easier to carry, or just make you feel older? Either way, you're in good company.